The sound of the water lapping against the shore is something I've come to know like the back of my hand. Quiet, steady, and calming. It's a peace I don't often share with the world. But today, as I stood at the edge of my lake cabin, the world beyond the glass doors felt like a threat. The HOA was here, and they had no idea who they were messing with. I heard their footsteps before I saw them. The three of them, walking up the stone path looking every bit like the self-appointed guardians of some suburban kingdom. I could hear the murmurs of their clipped, confident voices, like the sound of a snake slithering over dry leaves. The kind of people who believed their paperwork was more powerful than the land itself. The kind who felt their authority was absolute. When they reached my front door, I wasn't surprised. I had been expecting them. In fact, I'd been waiting for this moment for over a decade. But now that it was here, I could feel my heart beat a little faster. Not out of fear, but anticipation. You see, sometimes life has a way of drawing a line in the sand, making you choose between running and standing your ground. And I wasn't about to run. The first knock was sharp, deliberate, an unwelcome reminder of who they thought they were. The second came faster, a bit more insistent, as though they were ready to move things along quickly. But I wasn't in a hurry. I took a slow, measured step to the door. A glance through the peephole told me exactly who they were. Their faces, familiar in a way I hadn't cared to notice before. The HOA board members, a small, disgruntled group of people who had more time on their hands than sense in their heads. I'd heard the rumors, of course, of how they'd been targeting anyone with a unique property or cabin along this quiet stretch of lake. Now they were standing at my door, expecting me to cower, expecting me to just roll over. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I opened the door slowly, feeling the cool breeze of the lake push against the warm cabin air. The sight of them, neatly dressed in their stiff business casuals, contrasted sharply with the relaxed, rugged vibe of my lakeside home. They looked uncomfortable, like they didn't belong. "Mr. Carson," one of them said, the words coming out of his mouth like a statement, as if he had already decided how this was going to end, his glasses perched just so on his nose, giving him the air of someone who had read one too many law books but never stepped foot in the real world. "That's me," I said, standing tall in the doorway, my arms folded loosely over my chest, like I had all the time in the world to listen to whatever nonsense they were about to throw at me. "We're here to talk about your property," he continued, his voice full of unnecessary authority. "It's come to our attention that you've made a number of modifications that are not in compliance with HOA regulations." I nodded slowly. Of course, they always came up with something. The cabin had been in my family for years. It wasn't just a home, it was a legacy. My grandfather had built it by hand, every nail driven with purpose. Over the years, I'd made a few improvements, nothing extravagant, just a few touches that made the cabin livable for modern times. A small deck, a dock, a bit of landscaping, nothing that would raise an eyebrow in most places. But the HOA? They didn't like it. They had a list, a series of rules that felt more like a petty power grab than anything remotely helpful. And now, they were here to enforce it, as if I was some kind of intruder on land that had been passed down to me for generations. "Here's the deal," he said, pulling out a neatly folded document from his folder. "We've reviewed your property, and according to our records, you're in violation of several codes. You've encroached on HOA property, built on land you don't own, and you've made alterations to the boat dock that are against community guidelines. We've given you plenty of warnings." I resisted the urge to laugh. Warnings? They'd never bothered to send me any, not in a way that mattered. Just a few vague letters stuffed into my mailbox with a sense of importance that didn't actually make any sense. But this was different. They were trying to scare me into submission. "We're here today to inform you that unless you begin removing the unauthorized structures and comply with the HOA regulations, we will be forced to take legal action. he continued, his words growing more serious, more like a threat than a suggestion, and in that moment it all clicked. This wasn't just about rules. This wasn't just about some imaginary line on a map. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to take something they had no right to. They weren't just here for my cabin. They were here for my land. And worse, they were here for the boat dock. "You're not going to like this," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "But you're wrong." The three of them looked at me, confused for a split second. Their expressions flickered, between disbelief and disdain, as if I were some fool who didn't understand the weight of the situation. It was almost comical how certain they were. "I don't think you understand the situation," I continued, taking a small step back to let them inside. "But before we get into all of that, maybe you should take a seat. You're about to learn something that might change your mind." They hesitated, exchanging a quick glance. But, as is often the case with people who think they've got all the answers, they couldn't resist. They stepped inside, one after the other. The woman who entered last, the one with the high heels that clicked too loudly on the wooden floor, was the first to speak. "We don't have time for games, Mr. Carson. We're here to settle this. We have all the evidence we need." I smiled. That smile, the one that comes when you know something they don't. When you've been holding your cards close to your chest for so long, you almost don't want to reveal the truth. But it was time. It was time to show them exactly who they were dealing with. "Here's the thing," I said, leaning against the counter. "You've been reading your papers, but you've missed something crucial. I own this whole lot, not just the cabin. I own the whole damn lakefront." Their eyes widened. The man in the front blinked rapidly, like he was processing the words, but couldn't quite make sense of them. "The boat dock, too," I added, feeling the first stirrings of satisfaction in my chest. "It's mine." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. You could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, the realization slowly sinking in. They had been so sure, so utterly sure that they could bully me into compliance. But the truth? The truth was that the land I had inherited wasn't just some piece of property. It was a patch of earth that had been overlooked, lost in the paperwork. They had been wrong about everything. I could see it now. The cracks in their armor. The doubt. They didn't know what to say next. They didn't know what to do with the truth that had just been thrown at them. I had played my part perfectly. And now it was their turn to make a move, but I wasn't done yet. "I've been letting you trespass on my property, let's call it that. But from now on, if you want anything from me, you're going to have to do it the right way. Through me. Through the law." I locked eyes with each of them, one by one. "And trust me, I have all the proof I need to back up every word." The man's face turned pale, and the woman's posture stiffened, as though the walls around them were closing in. They had thought they were in control. They had assumed that their little community rules could intimidate me into submission. But now it was clear they were the ones who were vulnerable. There was no more talk of warnings, no more veiled threats. They were all too aware that any attempt to push me further would only make things worse. They had underestimated me, and as I stood there watching their reaction, I couldn't help but think that they had no idea what they were really up against. They were about to find out. Have you ever faced a situation where people thought they could control your life, only to discover you had the upper hand all along? Share your experience in the comments below and subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. The silence hung in the air like a taut wire, ready to snap at the smallest provocation. They stood there in my cabin, the 3 HOA members, their faces straining against the truth I had just dropped on them, a truth they had never expected. A truth that, in a single moment, had stripped away their certainty and revealed them for what they truly were. Opportunists who believed in their power only because no one had ever bothered to challenge it. It was their turn to speak. But they were still struggling with what I had just said. The woman, who had been the most vocal in her earlier demands, cleared her throat, the words seemingly stuck in her mouth. "Mr. Carson," she began, her tone shaky now. "We understand there may be some confusion, but that doesn't change the fact that—" "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "There's no confusion here. You've made an error, and now you're in over your heads." I leaned forward, hands flat on the table, steadying myself. "You've been coming after the wrong person. The real question is why? Why this cabin? Why now? Because you're not just after some regulations or fines. You're after my property. You've been eyeing this land for a while, haven't you?" Let that sink in, watching as the color drained from their faces. The man in the front, the one who had been so quick to hand me the legal threats, shifted on his feet, his fingers twitching at the folder in his hand. The woman, I could see, was searching her mind for something to say, anything to regain control of the situation. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Carson," she tried again, but this time her voice cracked, betraying the uncertainty she was struggling to hide. "I'm not the one making mistakes," I shot back. "You're the ones who've been going around, trying to take what isn't yours. That dock, the land around it, you're not legally entitled to it. And now you're trying to claim it, trying to force me off it like it's some insignificant piece of land. Well, guess what? I'm not giving in. Not now, not ever." I didn't need to raise my voice. The quiet certainty of my words, the weight of the truth behind them, had already silenced them. They were realizing that their arrogance had led them into a corner that was about to cost them more than they could have ever imagined, but that was only the beginning. "We don't need to get defensive," the man said, suddenly standing taller, his posture shifting. But I could see through the bravado. He was rattled. "We'll handle this legally. We have the right to—" "Legally?" I cut him off again. "You want to go legal? Fine. But know this. I've already had my lawyer look over everything. You don't have a leg to stand on, and don't try to pull that community guidelines nonsense. I know those rules inside and out. They've got nothing to do with me." The man's face twisted into something resembling frustration. "You're not the only one who knows the law, Mr. Carson." I met his gaze without flinching. "I know, and I know that the land you're trying to claim, it's mine. So you're going to have to find a new way to justify this." The woman, who had been silent for a moment, spoke again, her voice low and controlled. "It's not just about land. It's about the integrity of the community. You're disrupting things here. The way you've treated the property—" "The way I've treated it?" I interrupted, voice rising now, though I kept it steady. "I've cared for this land for years, longer than you've even known it existed. Longer than your HOA has had a single say in anything. So don't lecture me on integrity. You don't care about the community. You care about power. You care about control." Her lips pressed into a tight line, and I could tell she was about to say something in return. But I was done letting them think they held any ground here. I stepped around the counter and moved toward the window, looking out at the calm lake. The place that had always been mine. My grandfather's place. My father's place. My place. "Tell me this," I said, still watching the water outside. "Why do you think the people who've been here longest, people like me, are always the ones you target? You act like it's about the rules, but it's not. It's about something else. It's about pushing people like me out, so that you can take control." There was a beat of silence before the woman finally responded, her voice now almost a whisper. "We're just trying to make sure things don't get out of hand, Mr. Carson. We're here to keep the community stable." I turned to face them, my eyes sharp, unwavering. "Stable," I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "Is that what you call it? No. What you're doing is called gentrification. It's about taking what's been passed down for generations and selling it off to the highest bidder, and you thought you could do it here, didn't you?" They froze. Not one of them said a word. Not a single breath escaped their lips. I continued, stepping closer to them now. "This isn't about community. It's about power. And you know what? I'm not going to let you have it. Not over my dead body. The man blinked, his hand trembling as he lowered the folder he'd been clutching. You're making this difficult. No, I said, walking past him toward the door. You've made it difficult. You came to my home. You tried to bully me, but that's not how this works. You can leave now, or I can make sure you never step foot on this property again. You don't have the right to take anything from me. Not my land, not my dock, nothing. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, they all began to file out the door, their shoulders heavy with defeat. The woman shot me one last glance, but there was no fire left in her eyes. They knew they were beaten. They knew they'd overplayed their hand. I watched them go, my chest tightening with the victory, but also with the knowledge that this wasn't over. It couldn't be. If they had been bold enough to come at me once, they'd come again. But next time, they wouldn't be ready for what I had planned. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. There was something sweet about the victory, but I couldn't relax. Not yet. Behind me, I could hear the quiet hum of the boat dock, calling me. Have you ever had to stand your ground in the face of overwhelming odds? Share your experience with us in the comments below. And if you're hooked, don't forget to subscribe for more twists, turns, and power plays that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The storm didn't come as quickly as I had expected. For days, I paced through my cabin, living in the strange space between victory and the knowledge that it was far from over. The HOA members had backed off for now, but I could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't something they would let slide. I knew they'd come back. They always did. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I had already been prepared for this. I had spent weeks, months even, making sure I had everything in place. It was time to turn the tables. The game had shifted, and now I was the one holding all the cards. I sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the stack of papers that had been gathering dust for years. The land deeds, the title to the dock, the records showing every legal transaction ever made. My lawyer had been crucial in all of this, gathering everything from the original documentation to the most recent surveys of the land. But it wasn't just legal proof I needed something else. The HOA was a problem, yes, but there were deeper stakes here. This was about power, about the control they believed they had over the community. They thought they could just push people around, dictate the terms, and twist the rules in their favor. What they didn't realize was that their arrogance had led them to underestimate not just me, but a whole network of people who'd had enough of their games. And this time, I wasn't going to play by their rules. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a text from Jack, a former business partner of mine, and a man who was just as fed up with the HOA as I was. Meet me at the usual spot. I have something you'll want to see. I knew exactly what he meant. Jack had been working on something for me. Something that would turn the tide for good. A little leverage of my own. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, the quiet murmur of the lake barely audible in the background. The air was thick, with the anticipation of what was about to unfold. The drive to the cafe was quick. As I parked, I noticed Jack standing by the door, his face impassive, but his eyes were sharp. He gave me a quick nod before leading me inside. "I've got it," he said simply, pulling a small folder from his bag and handing it over to me. "Everything you need." I opened the folder, and for a moment I didn't say anything. It was all there. The missing pieces of the puzzle. Surveillance footage, photos, witness statements, everything showing the HOA's ties to the very developers they had been working with, the people they'd been conspiring with to take over the land surrounding the lake. They thought they could manipulate the situation, pressuring homeowners like me to sell or leave. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated the power of the truth. "You're sure about this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline I felt. Positive. I've got the proof, Jack said, his gaze unwavering. The developers are involved in multiple projects around here, and they've been pulling strings behind the scenes. They thought they could get away with it, but it's all here. You've got them now. I could feel the weight of the moment settle over me. This wasn't just about my cabin. This wasn't just about my dock. This was about every homeowner on the lake who had been pushed around by these people, who had watched as the HOA flexed its muscles and wielded power like a weapon. It was time to take that weapon away. "We move now," I said, closing the folder and standing up. "They don't get to control this place any longer." Jack gave a nod, and we both knew exactly what needed to be done. It was time to take action. No more playing nice. No more waiting for them to make the next move. We would make the move. The next few days were a whirlwind. I spent hours on the phone, talking to neighbors, organizing meetings, and contacting the people who had been affected by the HOA's reign of terror. They hadn't expected anyone to stand up to them, but now, with the evidence I had, we were a united front. People who had been too afraid to speak out before were suddenly emboldened. They saw the strength in numbers, the possibility of taking back control of their homes and their futures. As I prepared for the final confrontation, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment the truth would come crashing down on them. The HOA had scheduled another meeting, this time at a local conference center. They had sent out invitations to all the residents, though I knew it was little more than a formality. They thought they could dictate the terms, control the narrative, and silence anyone who might speak out. But they had no idea what was waiting for them. I stood at the back of the room, surveying the scene. The conference center was filled with the usual suspects: HOA board members, their allies, and a handful of disinterested residents who were just there because they felt obligated. But what they didn't know was that there were others in the crowd, my allies, people I had recruited to fight back. Neighbors who had long been silenced by fear or indifference, now ready to stand up and make their voices heard. The meeting began with the usual presentation, the HOA board members talking about rules and regulations, the same tired speeches they'd given countless times before. I could see the smugness in their faces, the belief that they were untouchable. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it was my turn to speak. I stood up from the back of the room, making my way to the front with purpose. The room grew quiet as all eyes turned to me. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had no idea what was coming. "I'm not here to discuss regulations," I said, my voice carrying through the room. "I'm here to expose the truth." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. Then, I opened the folder I had been carrying. Jack's work, the evidence of the HOA's collusion with the developers, the backroom deals, the manipulation, the lies. "I've got the proof," I continued, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. "Everything you've been doing in secret. The deals you've made behind closed doors, the land you've been trying to steal. And it's all right here, for anyone who wants to see it." I spread the documents out on the table, and the room was instantly electric. People started whispering, leaning forward, their curiosity piqued. The HOA board members exchanged panicked glances. They had never expected anyone to fight back like this, to come armed with the truth they had been desperately trying to bury. "I'm not the only one here who has had enough," I said, turning to the crowd. "We've all had enough, and it's time to put an end to this." With that, I took the first step toward dismantling their empire. One by one, the neighbors who had been silenced, the people who had been pushed around, stood up. They spoke out. They shared their stories. And as they did, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The HOA's control over the community, its stranglehold, began to slip away. The board members tried to regain control, but it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable, and the voices of the people were too loud. There was no going back. Now, the truth had been laid bare, and nothing could stop the wave of justice that was about to crash down on them. Have you ever been caught in a battle where the truth was your only weapon? How did you take control of the situation? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories of resilience and redemption. Oh, Minnie. The meeting had ended in chaos. The once calm, carefully orchestrated facade of the HOA crumbled in front of the residents. The room was a whirlwind of voices, of disbelief and anger. No longer able to rely on their usual tactics of intimidation and power, the HOA members were left stammering, trying to salvage what little dignity they had left. I stood at the back of the room watching the fallout unfold. I could see the fear in their eyes. I could hear the tremble in their voices as they tried to justify their actions, but the damage had already been done. The truth had been exposed, and now there was no way for them to escape it. But for me, it wasn't about the satisfaction of seeing them unravel. It was about something deeper, something more profound. This wasn't just about reclaiming my cabin, my dock, or my piece of land. This was about something much larger. This was about power, the power to control your own life, to not let someone else dictate your future. It was about the strength that comes when you refuse to be bullied, when you stand up and say, "No more." The weeks that followed the meeting were a blur. I watched as the HOA board members tried to salvage their reputations, scrambling to cover up their tracks, to twist the narrative in their favor. But it was too late. The community had already seen the truth. Their grip on the residents was slipping, and one by one people began to speak out, to join the movement. My phone buzzed with messages of support. Neighbors who had once been silent now reached out to thank me, to tell me how they'd been waiting for someone to take a stand. They were tired of living in fear, tired of letting the HOA decide what was right for them. They wanted change, and now they saw that change was possible. It was in these moments that I understood what I had started. The battle had been personal for me. It had been about my home, my property, but the ripples of that battle had spread across the entire community. And as the HOA tried to recover, it became clear that the winds had changed. They could no longer dictate the rules. The community had woken up, and they were not going to let it go back to the way it had been. The fight wasn't over, not yet, but we had taken the first step, and it felt good. It felt like we were finally in control. Months passed, and the pressure mounted on the HOA. Legal battles, public scrutiny, and the very real threat of losing. Their grip on the community weighed heavily on them. Their power, once absolute, now seemed fragile as more and more residents began to take action. Some filed lawsuits of their own, while others simply refused to pay fees or comply with regulations. They now saw as corrupt and unjust. The once high and mighty HOA board, with their smug confidence and their belief in their untouchable status, had become nothing more than a hollow shell. Their influence crumbled under the weight of the legal challenges, the media coverage, and the growing number of residents who had had enough. But the true turning point came when one of the developers they had been working with, a man who had thought he could escape unnoticed, was caught in the crossfire. His connections to the HOA were exposed, and the evidence of his involvement in the land grab became undeniable. The developer's once sparkling reputation tarnished overnight. It didn't take long for the legal system to catch up with him. The man was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and illegal land deals, and the fallout from that scandal reverberated throughout the entire community. The HOA's ties to corruption were now open for everyone to see. With the developers now on the defensive, the HOA had nowhere left to hide. They tried to salvage what little power they had left by making small concessions, softening some of their policies, offering apologies, and pledging to listen to the community. But it was too little, too late. The damage was done. The trust they had worked so hard to build over the years had evaporated. The residents could see through their empty promises, and they had no intention of letting them regain control. The final blow came when a petition to dissolve the HOA was launched. It quickly gained momentum, supported by hundreds of residents, who were done with the lies, the manipulation, and the abuse of power. The vote passed overwhelmingly. The HOA was dissolved. It was a victory, not just for me, but for every single person who had been affected by their overreach. As the dust settled and the remnants of the HOA crumbled, I found myself standing on the edge of the dock, looking out at the lake once more. It had been a long road, and I knew it wasn't just about the battles we fought. It was about what came after, what legacy we left behind. The community was different now. The power had shifted. People who had once been passive, resigned to the whims of the HOA, were now empowered. They had seen firsthand what it looked like to stand up for what's right, to fight back against those who try to push you down. They had seen the change that could happen when you refused to stay quiet. For me, the fight had been personal. But the victory? The victory was for all of us. It was a victory for every person who had ever been told they didn't matter, for every person who had been made to feel small by those in power. It was a victory for every home, every family, every dream that had been threatened by greed and control. As I stood there on the dock, the water lapping gently at the edge, I knew that this victory would be remembered. It would echo in the community for years to come. People would tell the story of how the HOA, once so powerful, was brought down. Not by a lawyer, not by a politician, but by one person, standing up for what was right. One person who refused to back down. And that's the legacy I would leave. Not just the victory over the HOA, but the message that one person can make a difference. That the power of truth, the power of standing up for what you believe in, can change the world. Do you believe that one person can change everything? What's the biggest battle you've ever faced, and how did you overcome it? Share your story in the comments below and let us know how you've stood up against injustice. And if you're ready for more stories of courage, strength, and transformation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let's keep fighting for what's right, together. A mini.